Energy Policy Manager at Xcel Energy. Just wanted to check, Jane, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, just want to make sure. And so I'm very honored to come speak to y'all today. I was in your shoes in grad school just 6 or 7 years ago, and know how hard it is, and also how exciting it is. And just thanks for taking the time to stop in your busy schedules and hear a little bit more about Xcel Energy and our goal. It's been a super exciting time for me and my team as we've been in the center of helping with this goal, and now trying to help the company figure out how to get there, along with thousands of others in our company. So today what we'll cover, I'm going to go over a little bit about Xcel Energy, who we are and what drives us, our carbon goal and how we get there, and then why the focus on carbon. So with that, we'll get started. So Xcel Energy is both a gas and an electric utility company, and we serve millions of customers across 8 different states, as you can see in our territory. And one thing we're really proud of is already to date, we've been a leader in wind energy across the country. And one thing you'll notice about our territory that's really helpful for us is we are in a very windy territory with lots of solar as well. So we have the luxury of having really good wind and solar resources that we can take advantage of as we run our system. And in terms of our priorities, these are our 3 corporate priorities: leading the clean energy transition, enhancing the customer experience, and keeping bills low. And what's exciting about our carbon goal is that while it fits neatly into this lead the clean energy transition bucket, it also hits the other 2 key priorities. You'll see that we've enhanced the customer experience by giving them the low carbon energy and electricity that they want. And also we'll talk a little bit about some customer programs that we have for any customer that really wants even more renewable energy than is on the full system. And then lastly, keeping the bills low. This is really fundamental to our business. We are a regulated utility, which means we're required to serve all customers in our territory. And so it's really important to keep those bills low and affordable so that everybody has access to not only electricity, but the clean electricity that we're trying to provide. So what you'll hear today really fits into all of these corporate priorities, and that's been really key in making this goal possible. So in terms of where we are right now, we've been a leader in this field, as I've said, since 2005. We just announced that as of 2018, we've reduced our carbon emissions by 38%, which is a pretty huge figure, and we're pretty stoked about that. We've done it through a lot of wind again, and also transitioning our coal and natural gas fleet and energy efficiency. When we're looking forward, this is where we've set a really bold goal of 80% reductions by 2030. And that goal we believe we can do with current technology. Now, it's important to keep in mind that this is not a resource plan. So the specifics of how we get to 80% is really going to be played out at our commissions and through our resource planning process. But we believe we can get there with current technologies. And I'll talk a little bit more about our strategy to get there in a minute. And then in terms of 2050, yes, that's a ways out, but we wanted to put a marker out there of 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050. This is really more of an aspiration than it is a goal, and that distinction is important because we don't know exactly how we're going to get to 100% carbon-free. There's a lot of technology, innovation, policy that we're going to be working towards to really get to that aspiration. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about what technology and policy we're looking to get. So that's kind of where we are and the goals that we've set. Now, the next step we wanted to do was look at, well, is this goal really effective? And one way that we've both been asked to do this and also how we wanted to do it was compare our goal and our trajectory to the climate science that is currently available. Now, our team and our company are not climate scientists, so we actually went out and did some work with a lead IPCC author at the University of Denver, and we contracted with them to help us really look deeply into the science and understand both what's out there and then how we can compare our goals. So what you see here is our trajectory is the bolded line, getting down to 100% carbon free by 2050. And the gray lines are the areas, this is the range of scenarios of the electric sector reductions that would be needed in order to limit warming below 2 degrees Celsius. Now within that range, there's a lot of different scenarios. So this is all outlined in our carbon report, which we released just a few weeks ago. And if you're interested, there's a lot more detail on how we came to this range. And there's even an analysis by University of Denver included in there that shows all the different scenarios that are included in this gray shaded area. And we looked at, the scenarios we looked at are the ones that were either likely or more likely than not to achieve the 2 degree Celsius global goal. So that means all the scenarios we looked at had a 50% or 60% or higher likelihood of helping the globe reach the 2 degree goal. The only exception is we did take out any scenarios that included negative emissions in the later years. We thought that was a more conservative approach because we don't want emissions to go up now. And also the negative emission scenarios are just a little bit unknown at this point. But the takeaway here, as you can see by the slide, is really that our goals are in line with the global goal of limited warming to 2 degrees Celsius. And we're pretty excited about having this really great analysis that can help support our goal and show that we're really doing our part in this space. Now, we announced the goal in December of 2018, and the feedback we got was enormous. I think on social media it was somewhere in the millions, 60 million or more of views that we got. And here's just a few examples of what people were saying about it. So we were pretty excited that this got picked up in both industry media and outside of that. Now let's talk a little bit, like I said, we've obviously with these goals laid out that carbon emissions reductions is really our number one goal here. And we're gonna do what we can to meet these goals. We think we can meet 2030 goal with current technology, and again, the 2050 is more of an aspiration. But in order to achieve either of those goals, we really need these drivers to work out for us. The first one is protecting energy reliability and affordability. As I mentioned at the beginning, this only works from both a carbon reduction perspective and from a regulatory perspective if we keep rates low and affordable and accessible to everyone. And then, of course, reliability is our business. We have over 99% reliability, and we want to keep that. As we look ahead, we're also looking for support from our states and stakeholders, and this kind of combines with the third one of getting constructive public policy. So we're looking for policies and our states and stakeholders to help us set the conditions that will make it possible for us to achieve these goals and make it worthwhile for us as a company. And then the last one is really important, and we'll talk about this more, is developing carbon-free 24/7 technologies for 2050. So what that means is that we need basically baseload, since if we're having to look at getting away from coal and potentially natural gas, you need something to replace that. And you need something that you're able to control so that when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining, we're still providing reliable electricity. And this is where innovation and research and development will be required over the next couple of decades. Okay, so I've mentioned a couple times now that we see a path forward to our 80% reduction goal by 2030. So I just want to kind of lay out the elements of how we will get there. Again, it's not a resource plan, but we see all of these elements playing a role in how we do this. So first off, I mean, we're already a leader in renewable energy, and we're only going to do more. We're going to need a lot more wind and some solar to help us get to the 80% reduction goal. Natural gas and energy storage are going to play a big role in backing up that renewable energy, and again, making sure we can meet our reliability needs. We have 2 nuclear plants that are located in Minnesota, and they have license dates to currently run through the early 2030s, and we do foresee using those through their license dates at this time. And then we're currently evaluating kind of what to do with that once those are at least slated to come offline. We're transitioning the coal fleet. We have had a series of retirements. By 2027, we'll have reduced about 50% of our coal plants, and we'll be considering what other things need to happen for that. In some cases, we have replaced those with natural gas. Energy efficiency is a key to all of this. Always, it's a low-cost way to help reduce load, so that the less load, the less electricity we have to produce. And we have pretty robust energy efficiency programs in all of our territories, and do that through a resource planning process as well with our PUCs. Now, everybody loves to talk about electrification, and we are quite excited about that as well. There will be strategic electrification included in our pathway forward. We're starting to make a lot of headway on transportation electrification. We really see that as a really no regrets way to move forward now and help. As we reduce our carbon, we can help other sectors do the same. There may be long-term opportunities in space, water heating, or other industrial uses, but we think we need to do that very strategically, and more research is required to do that. And lastly, of course, we're constantly going to be investing in the grid, because this large-scale system is, we are the shepherds of that system, and it's also a really wonderful pathway to achieve large-scale emissions reductions. So we've got some investments in the grid, like the advanced grid technology, which allows better metering and interactions with customers. Okay, now we get into a little more of the juicy stuff. As I mentioned, our 2050 aspiration is to go carbon-free electricity. But we really need new technologies to do that. We have listed here some of the ones that we are at least, starting to look at, but we're not picking a winner. There's a lot of work to do to get any one of these all the way to commercialization and to meet the cost thresholds that we need. But we want to start the market thinking about how do you really push all these technologies to commercialization. So we've just some examples. Again, these aren't we're not picking winners here. We're open to options, but just some examples are natural gas with carbon capture and storage, deep rock geothermals, and my favorite is power to gas. That's in the diagram here at the bottom. So we're able to use our surplus renewable electricity to make hydrogen through electrolysis, and that can be stored in our gas pipelines or elsewhere. But the advantage of that is really long-term storage, seasonal storage, which is a real issue we'll need to deal with as we add more renewables to our system. And some others are listed here. But we're really hoping, we're betting on innovation here, that by putting this stake in the ground, some of these innovations will develop. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little here. That was basically our goal and how we plan to get there. And again, we'll circle back with questions on that. But I want to talk a little bit about why we're focused on carbon. So when we looked at setting our goal, there were many factors for why we did it. A lot of things came together to drive us to this goal, but one factor that has been going on, and you've probably seen, is this trend towards really aggressive carbon and renewable energy goals by cities, customers, and many of those are in our territory. Just listed here as a sampling of the cities and communities within our territory that have set really aggressive goals. You can see they're somewhat split between a focus on carbon and a focus on renewable energy. And we are a customer-focused company, so we do want to help these customers meet whatever goals that they have laid out. And one way, and as you can see, there's a lot of renewable energy goals there. So just to talk a little bit about our renewable energy strategy, it's mostly encapsulated in this program called Steel for Fuel, where we're adding a whole lot more wind energy in particular, and getting to invest in that steel while reducing our fuel costs from other fuel-powered resources. So we have what you see here is what's currently kind of under development. Most of these have been approved and they're under construction. And so this is going to add a whole lot more wind to our system. And again, this really will help support our customer energy goals, because the more we add renewables to our system, the more they're starting from a really high renewable baseline. And this just gives you a little bit more quantitative analysis of how this transition is happening. You can see that in 2017, in this case, we're about 39% carbon free. Actually 30%, that's the nuclear plus the renewables here. And by 2027, our plans are setting us out to over 60% carbon-free energy. So that gives you an idea of this growth we're seeing on our system of renewable energy in particular. Now, that said, even as we're adding all of these renewables to our system, those goals that you saw from the communities are quite aggressive in terms of their timeline. So we are finding that some customers want to go quicker than we are doing on our full system for all our customers. So we've laid out a lot of we have a lot of programs that are set up just for those customers. So our newest one I'll highlight is Renewable Connect, and a customer can basically sign up and get up to 100% of their electricity met by wind and solar with the renewable energy credit. And then we can go out and use that to build a wind or solar facility. And this has been extremely popular in all of our territories. But all these programs are really programs that customers can tap into to help meet their goals for their individual load. That said, we see some really big challenges to getting what I'll call the big grid. So that's the full system, not looking at individual customers, but the system that serves all our customers. We see some really big challenges to getting to 100% renewable. And that is really the main reason we focused on carbon-free technologies. So I'll just talk for a few slides here on the challenges with 100% renewables. And again, I'll preface this, we are promoters of renewables, and as you've seen, we're going to be adding a lot more. We just want to make sure we don't make it too costly. So what we've seen mostly from external research is that once you get over 60% renewables, you start to see some system issues. Mostly you're going to have to build out the grid pretty extensively, because as you add more and more wind, your marginal value starts to decrease. So you have to build that out. more. And so then you end up with a lot of renewable energy that you're not able to use at certain times. So you need to find a storage solution that is not just hours, but can help you across seasons, so weeks or even months. We have an example here that is from a group called the Clean Air Task Force that basically just shows that as you're adding more and more renewables, the cost is incrementally going up. So you can see once you get to 100% renewable portfolio standard, your costs are astronomically higher here. So your wind, to have a system that's just based on wind, solar, and storage is this about $1,600 per megawatt hour. And then what we're also seeing in this scenario is that the abatement cost of that CO2 is in the $16,000 a ton versus where we're trading today in the WCI market, which is around $15. So we want to reduce carbon, and we want to do it the most cost-effectively way possible. I already mentioned this. Again, as you get to 100% renewables, you're looking at building out your system up to 8 times. That varies by which study you looked at, but regardless, it's going to be significant. And then let's talk about storage a little bit. Battery storage is a phenomenal resource. The storage facility we show here is from a partnership that we have with Panasonic in Denver that's testing some different battery options. But what we see here is that the largest battery in the world is much larger than this Panasonic one, and it's about 100 megawatts, 129 megawatt hours. At fully charged, that can help us shift that wind resource about 1.29 hours. So we're talking about hours here, but when we start looking at really high renewable, we really need 8 to 16 weeks of storage. So you can imagine there's just a scaling issue there, and maybe batteries will get there, but we think we need to keep our options open and look at some other options as well. So this kind of summarizes what I just said, which is that at the end of the day, we want to have a lot of different resources, and we want it to be balanced. So we're balancing short-term storage options with flexible base resources, and this is where you really need that 24/7 dispatchable generation. And then lastly, you'll have your renewable resources. Now, this chart is a little bit complicated, but if you look at the y-axis is the average cost of electricity, and your x-axis is your CO2 emissions limit. And what you can see is when the pie chart is full and you've got all 3 of those options, including your firm low carbon, so that's dispatchable carbon-free resources, your costs are a lot lower and you can achieve more emissions reductions. Whereas if you limit your options to just your renewables and storage, your costs are going to be quite a bit higher. So again, the point here is we have really focused on carbon reductions. We believe that is really the common goal that all of us share, and really sets us up in a place to start from an area of common agreement. And renewables energy is going to be one of the most important tools to help us get there. But we're really interested in keeping our options open and pushing for more innovation. So we'll be looking for low-cost options while at the same time pushing for technology innovation over the next couple of decades. And I think I really flew through that. So if I would like to go ahead and open it up for discussion, and we can have a little bit more of a back and forth here for the last part of the conversation.
That sounds great. So thank you again, Lauren, for such an interesting presentation. I think we've already gotten in some really great questions, and just want to encourage folks to keep typing those in, and we can have a little bit more of a conversation going here. as I know so many people are so interested in learning more about what utilities can do and kind of what the pathway for, really aggressive carbon reductions can be. So to kind of kick it off, the first question that we'll pose to you is, why do you think not all utilities are taking as progressive of a stance with regard to emissions as Xcel? Is this something unique about Xcel's current position that allows it to be on the cutting edge versus others, or perhaps something else?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The industry right now is in a really interesting place. I'd start by saying, before we even set this goal, our goal used to be 60% by 2030, and that was a pretty leading goal as well. And there's actually a lot of utilities with pretty aggressive goals. I think a lot of them are in the process of evaluating, well, can they really get to something more aggressive than what they've set already? And the one unique thing about Xcel, again, goes back to the service territory that we have, because we can get high capacity wind, and in the future, and we're starting to get more high capacity solar. That's really a virtue of where we are geographically. So we have that advantage, which a lot of other utilities don't. And so we're lucky for that. Our CEO is going to be the head of our industry association, the Edison Electric Institute, starting, I believe, in 2020. And I think this will be a big part of his message with other utilities. And I think a lot of other utilities are starting to think about this. But it's a real balance to make sure, you're setting ambitious goals, but also feeling like you can get what you need to achieve them. And a lot of utilities, I think, are watching what happens for us, both in the policy space and in the operational space. And so, yeah, we're definitely not operating in a vacuum, and I think the industry is working on it as well.
Certainly. Yeah, it's an interesting period of time. And I think you mentioned earlier, as a regulated entity, there are all kinds of planning processes that need to take place. And so certainly it'll be an interesting space to keep an eye on going forward into the future, both looking at Xcel, but then also other utilities as well. So we have another question from the audience. Where can transmission investment play a role? Can you have, a geographic spread of wind, solar, and other resources to reduce localized variability? And then kind of a follow-up to that question is, where does energy efficiency fit into Xcel's plans? Can you reduce generation required? And I think you mentioned that in your presentation, but if you could elaborate on that a little bit more, that would be great.
Okay, great. So tackling the first part on transmission, that's a great question, because as we're building out this wind and solar, as you probably know, if you ask that question, a lot of that wind is not near the load centers, and you have to have transmission to get it there. When we're looking at that, we've been really successful in getting the transmission we need. For instance, our wind farm in Colorado called Rush Creek will be coming online, and we were able to make the investments in the transmission. We already had some lines it could work with, and we just had to add a few more, and we were able to do that. So that transmission piece is really part of how we implement, how we get the wind farms in the ground. There's a lot of siting challenges with that, particularly with endangered species issues, and just getting all the permitting and siting you need for both the wind farm itself and then also getting the transmission to the right place. I think we're a vertically integrated utility, so we have a transmission arm that invests in transmission and helps get us the right connections. In Minnesota and down in the Southwest, we're part of regional markets, which helps reduce the cost of transmission build out because you're able to work across the full system that covers multiple states. And that helps with balancing the renewables as well. I think there are people in the company kind of looking at these big ideas of, the high voltage transmission across the country, but that's not, our plan is not dependent on that happening across the country. So transmission is definitely going to be something we're going to have to watch really closely, and it'll be the key to success in getting all these resources online. But we'll be taking advantage of the markets that we're in, and we think we can get that done. In terms of the energy efficiency, I wish I have a slide on here that shows, not on this deck, but if you want to go to our corporate responsibility report, that at least shows our progress in energy efficiency to date. And we've been really successful in that. And I think you'll continue to see the trend of needing energy efficiency. I also think over time it's going to get a lot more targeted. There's a lot of policy discussions out there, and not just our states, but others of should we still be focused just on energy savings, or should it start to look at carbon reductions as well, which might help with making sure you're saving the energy at the time that the carbon's on the system, stuff like that. We're not there yet. No one's there yet, but those are the types of conversations that I think are going to keep energy efficiency is going to keep going, but it's going to evolve in exactly how it's implemented. I hope that answers. Those were tough questions. Hope that answers.
That was super interesting, and yeah, I think hit on those key points that people are trying to get at. As you can tell, we've got quite a technical group of listeners here today, and they're very interested and excited about the goals that you all have set. So it's wonderful. Kind of going along the transmission line, no pun intended, I guess. Can Xcel sell excess energy to utilities in other states? And are there areas where there might not be as much wind capacity that you could potentially, work with another utility in effectively deploying those renewable resources? Are there other efforts to work with utilities to reach these goals, or to effectively use the renewable resources that you all are putting on the grid actively today?
Okay, yeah, I'd say that really happens through these energy markets that we're part of. Again, that covers our upper Midwest territory and our Southwest territory. We aren't in a market in Colorado, but just in terms of balancing the system, you still end up having purchases and sales with other utilities in the state or out of the state. So some of that happens, but at the market level, that's really where you're seeing cross-cutting benefits across states, because as you pool more and more resources, whenever the wind's blowing anywhere, you have more access to deliver it to another place where maybe the wind isn't blowing. So if you weren't in a market like that, you would just have excess renewable and have nowhere to send it. So the short answer is really that the market is doing that right now. We haven't, as far as I'm aware, we haven't looked at any sort of formal partnerships with other utilities to do this. It's a great idea though, so I'll take that back. But I think the answer is really that's happening in the markets for the most part right now.
Awesome. So we're just going to keep on asking you a lot of really interesting questions. We've gotten a lot of questions from our listeners today, so keep them coming. We'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. I guess the next question is related to power to gas technology. Folks are wondering if there are proof of concepts with power to gas, and if there's a pilot under consideration. And then maybe what the prospect of reforming hydrogen with an overbuilt reserve of renewables. I guess it looks like, does the financing work now, or are they trending in the right direction? Is the question that people are wondering. If
Okay.
you could speak to that.
Well, I'm going to preface my answer by saying I'm not a technology expert, so I can't give you all the details. But if you're interested, there are folks at our company I can connect you with. But I'll tell you what I know, and that is that there's a lot of activity in the power to gas space. It's most advanced right now in Europe. In Germany, they just announced a new program where they're actually looking at doing the electrolysis process, getting the hydrogen, and then injecting it into the gas system. There's certainly a long way to go to make all of that cost effective, and Europe is definitely in the lead. And if any of you want to take a trip to Europe after school, I bet you could go find some power to gas facilities to tour. And then also in the US, what we're seeing is I think the trends are going in the right directions. A big barrier is the cost of the electrolyzer. But like any technology, that is likely to come down, particularly if we get more ways to use it. Southern California Gas has a pilot project. I don't know if it's considered a pilot. They have an R&D project going on at the National Renewable Energy Lab here in Denver. And that they've invested some money to do kind of proof of concept with NREL. That it's really interesting. That seems to be going well from what I know. And there's also some other utilities in the East Coast that are starting to invest in it. So it's definitely still in the early days. There's a lot more work to do, but as with all the technologies I mentioned, there's a lot more work to do to get them cost effective. But I think there's some evidence of a promising direction for that.
Great. Yeah, it's always exciting to hear kind of what's on the cutting edge, and certainly I think we'll need all of these approaches going forward. So it's great that folks like Xcel are looking into that work, and certainly that we know places like NREL do great work looking into that space as well. So it's wonderful. I guess speaking of other technologies, we have a question around nuclear energy, asking what Xcel's long-term plan for nuclear energy is, and how to kind of plan and manage for risks around nuclear, like waste disposal.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, like our CEO likes to say, we're in the business of managing risk. I mean, as a large-scale utility, we've got a lot of risks that we have to manage, and nuclear is obviously one of those. We've got really good operational teams and plans in place at our nuclear sites. In terms of our plan, like I mentioned, there's a lot under evaluation right now. Those two plants that we have are going at least have license dates through the early 2030s, and we have to do a lot of work between now and then to really come up with a plan for how we're going to manage those and work with our regulators to come up with a plan that works the best. I can't really give you any further predictions on that. There's a lot more work to do in terms of resource planning and how we're going to manage that. What I did mention on our technology slide is that we are starting to at least explore and look at and understand what new nuclear technologies are out there. There's new companies coming out with smaller modular reactors, different technology types, and there is at least a hope in that there might be reduced waste in that. So we're kind of looking at what the next generation of nuclear might look like. There are also some policy challenges with the waste at the federal and state level, and we're trying to work through those with our regulators as well.
Awesome. So now we kind of going back to maybe the financing side things and a potential tax on carbon. We have a question from the audience. Does the generation planning team use a shadow price on carbon? And if so, what range of prices do you use, and what's your multiplier over time?
Okay, great. Yeah, so when we do resource planning, we have a base case, which basically runs a low cost, the lowest cost scenario. And then we have a lot of sensitivities, and we do use a carbon price. In Colorado and the Southwest, it's a regulatory cost. So that's looking at what cost would the fossil units actually bear should a carbon tax or whatever carbon policy were to come into place at the state or federal level. So that's a really specific regulatory cost that is based on, the best estimate or economics of what that might be. To give you an example, in Colorado, for our last resource planning, we had a low and a high case. The low was pretty low because it looked at costs from the cost you would have seen under the Clean Power Plan, and don't quote me on this, but I think it started somewhere around $2 in the 2020s. And then we have a higher case that starts at $20, and most of these go up by inflation. And then we do also look at sensitivities with the social cost of carbon. We do that more so in Minnesota, but we do look at it in our other territories as well. And those are obviously higher. They're very different because they're looking at not just the regulatory costs, but centuries worth of costs that could come to bear due to climate change and those sorts of issues. So we do think it's really important to be careful working between those two things and just be knowledgeable about which one is telling us what. So that carbon price is a really big part of our resource planning, and helps, as to kind of give that alternate look of how it would work. We recently got approved our Colorado energy plan, and that involves retiring of 2 coal units down in Pueblo, Colorado. And we did a lot of work to not only get the carbon reductions that we were seeking, but also make that an affordable adjustment, and also to maintain the economy in that local community where the coal would be retired. So there's a lot of factors that go into exactly which plans we end up with. But the answer to the question is yes, that is a part of the planning, and you can find out more information within the resource planning documents at the state level as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we have so many questions. I'm trying to get through a few more before we have to say goodbye. But I guess next one, what are your thoughts on meeting the increased demand expected with the Electrify everything approach that many climate advocates are pursuing?
Ooh, that's a tough one. So I think you'll notice in our slides, we like to talk about strategic electrification. When we look out into the future, we think there's going to be a lot of scenarios where it makes a lot of sense, but there are also going to be scenarios where electrification might not make sense, both from a carbon and a cost perspective. And so, again, we're trying to take a pretty measured approach. We will definitely be working with those advocates that are looking at 100% or electrify everything. But we want to do it in a really cost-effective manner. A wholesale electrification requires further study to really understand what it means in terms of capacity build out, cost to customers, reliability, all those things. So like I said, kind of electrification of transportation is a really great place to start, and we already have some experience in that as EVs are growing in our territories, and we've found we've really been able to keep up with that additional load. When you're talking about heating, the load goes up quite a bit and at certain times. So especially during the winter months, we want to make sure that we can provide electricity or energy or natural gas, whatever that customer wants, on a reliable basis, definitely, especially in those cold months. So all of that really needs to be considered before we don't want to limit our options on the electrification front either. So while that, in 30 years, maybe that's the outcome, we don't know, but we need to be really mindful of how that works. And there might be, and I should say we also, have a gas business, and we are studying how do you reduce carbon in that gas business cost effectively. And there's other options like renewable natural gas. Power to gas could play into that as well. So we're definitely mindful of that and looking at it and trying to explore it, but we want to do it in a really cost-effective manner.
Absolutely. That makes sense and is very interesting. This whole conversation has been wonderful. I guess we've got one final kind of question, a two-part question. Part one, what resources are available / does Xcel make available to communities to assist in their carbon reduction goals? And then I guess on a final, more broad note, kind of looking to the future, what are you most excited about that Xcel is pursuing, and potentially beyond Xcel, what excites you in the utility sector kind of going forward?
Okay. Oh man. Okay, let's start with the community one while I figure out what's most exciting. But in terms of the communities, a couple things. One is we do have an online data source where we provide community level data on their energy usage, renewable energy usage. And then we also provide emissions factors where both communities and customers can calculate their own emissions based on what they're buying from us. And so we've got the community reports, which really provide the specific information for specific communities. I believe that's online. If you Google it, you'd be able to look at and see what we've included in that. That's kind of constantly evolving as we continue to work with communities on what their goals are and what, every community is different. So some of them, need different data and different information from us, and we're trying to be really responsive to that and get them what they need. But the community report's really sort of the base offering at this point. The other thing I mentioned is in Colorado, we have this really exciting program going on called the Energy Futures Collaboration. And we've basically signed memorandums of understanding with many communities throughout our Colorado territory. I think we're around 7 or 9 right now. I can't remember the exact number. But basically we sign these MOUs with them, and it lays out that, here are the goals that they want to achieve. Here's the regulatory environment in which we have to operate in order to provide that service to them. So it's coming to a really common understanding. And then through those MOUs, we're able to lay out work plans of, prioritizing what they want to do first, and then providing our resources as we can. And really, it's opened a really great dialogue between us and our communities that I think is really unique and is a new thing for the utility industry to be doing. So I'm pretty excited about that, and I think we've gotten really good feedback from the communities involved. Just a plug, because I work a lot, there's also the corporate responsibility report. We've also added a sustainability template for investors that you can also find online. So we work really hard to provide transparent data and information, not only on carbon, but on our full sustainability story. And we're constantly trying to refine that and make sure it meets the goals of all of our different audiences that need that information. So that's the community question. I think in terms of what I'm most excited about, I mean, I was just saying before I got online that I've been at Xcel about 6 years, and just the momentum that we're getting around these goals, around really exciting movement, and that we're going to really start looking at innovation and technology. I think that's really exciting. It's been really exciting to watch the wind transition as those costs have come down, and I think it'll be neat to see sort of what other technologies emerge that can help solve some of these problems. And I think what's great about Xcel and what I love about my job is just the constant problem solving towards a really exciting goal. So that's kind of what I'm most excited about in terms of my role, is helping the company figure out how to get there and how we're going to, meet those goals. And it'll be exciting to see where we are in 10, 20 years as this progresses.
Great. I think we are probably all in agreement that we're excited about looking out into the future and seeing, what we can do in the next, 10, 20 years to kind of have this rapid transition of carbon reducing policies and programs. And so I think we're all very excited about this space, and want to thank you again, Lauren, for taking the time to speak with us today. I think we are unfortunately out of time because we do have so many questions still from audience members. So it's really been a wonderful and thought-provoking presentation. So
Well,
this.
just want to say thank you. You guys had really excellent questions, and if there's a way I can answer more through you, Jane, or otherwise, I'm happy to do that. But really appreciate the excitement, and y'all have got really great questions. So thank you.
Awesome. So this concludes today's talk on creating an electric utility pathway for aggressive carbon reductions, conversation with Xcel Energy. Lauren, again, thank you so much for joining us today. We also want to thank the Blueprint audience for your questions. So to review or to view a recording of this webinar, please visit the Events tab on the Yale Center for Business and the Environment website, or access the recording through CBA's YouTube page. Thank you all again for joining us. And until next time, this is Jane Culkin from the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. Have a wonderful rest of your days.